Though 2009 wasn't the greatest year for role-playing games, Dragon Age Origins was without a doubt a fantastic entry for the genre, and was undoubtedly the best RPG of that year. But how does the sequel measure up? Well, there's been a few significant changes, and the story structure is much different than it was in the original game. So, are these changes enough to enhance the game's quality and continue the epic saga that started with Origins, or is it an abomination? Well, after 3 playthroughs, I think I've finally figured out how I feel about it. I'll start out with the story, the thing BioWare is known for repeatedly and unfailingly crafting with extreme care and quality. The plot of Dragon Age 2 is centralized on the player character Hawke and his or her family's flight from Ferelden, which is under the attack from the Blight prior to the ending of the first game. Their path leads them to the city-state of Kirkwall, which lies in the territory known as the Free Marshes. Here the Hawke family will endure conflict and oppression as they attempt to make a name for themselves inside the vast city.
Bullshit. That's not what really happened.
Does that not match the story you've heard, Seeker?
The story unfolds itself through the form of an interrogation as Cassandra, a seeker from the Chantry, interrogates a dwarf named Varric, one of your party members, on the location of the champion of Kirkwall, that being Hawke. It should go without saying that this is meant to be a much more personal tale than the first, and as with many RPGs which carry this sort of story, the narrative is rather grim. Part of the charm that captured players in Origins was the balance between hope and despair, pessimism and optimism, humor and sadness, peace and strife. There was a good deal of comic relief to balance out all of these aspects, and it gave the game a real life will go on sort of feeling. There's very little of that here in Dragon Age 2. Though I understand that this story is meant to carry darker undertones since Hawke's rise to power comes at great personal cost, so if there'd been too much levity, it would have undermined the impact of the sobering aspects of the Hawke family's struggles. This leads me to the overall feeling I got from the experience of playing in Kirkwall. As the game is a very centralized and personal tale, it takes place solely within the city-state of Kirkwall. Unlike Origins, you won't be traveling to many different locations, and on one level that seriously disappoints me and makes me feel as though I'm in a prison, but it also effectively mirrors Hawke's plight. I suppose the problem with this formula is that since this RPG is very similar in structure to Mass Effect, and Hawke will always become the champion of Kirkwall irrespective of your choices, you don't feel as if you really have a say in the matter, especially since you know at least part of your character's destiny by the nature of the story unfolding through flashbacks while Varric and Cassandra make vague references to what's to come. For me, the strength of an RPG is that it feels immersive, and the most immersive RPGs let you feel as though you've created the character, as though you define the character through your choices. In games like Mass Effect, which in this regard is even more hampered by the nearly pointless morality system, which is thankfully absent from Dragon Age 2, I don't really feel as though I am the character. I can project the broader aspects of my personality onto Hawke when given the 3 and rather distinctly different dialogue options that will normally be presented during exchanges, but I don't feel as though I am Hawke. And thus, it's hard for me as the player to feel pivotal to the story since I can't really empathize with my player character. It may be a good story, but it's not as satisfying as an RPG, since it feels more as though I'm watching predetermined events unfold before me, and I only get to mildly affect the outcome through dialogue options. This makes Kirkwall feel not like a prison unto myself, as it is for Hawke, but more of an annoyance which limits my ability to feel truly engaged. And in games like Mass Effect, this can be forgiven since the atmosphere is so much better, the setting is grander, and the story, which is brilliantly crafted, is more focused. This formula just didn't translate well to Dragon Age 2, in my opinion. Another problem with centralized stories like this is that they have a much greater potential for failing to capture the audience. When you're telling a story about traveling to different locations in order to gather the resources necessary to stop a big bad guy from taking over the world, then you've got a system that is by no means new, but it has a lot of components, it has a lot of pieces to it. And as long as you do it well, and you include brilliant characters and nuanced writing with great detail and realism, and you do most of the aspects well, you'll hook in the audience regardless of a few hiccups that may pop up here and there along the way. But when you're telling a story about one man or woman's triumph or failure in the face of adversity, then you're working on what will instantly be a more relatable and thus potentially more engrossing product. However, in a situation like this, if you bungle things, it's usually in your execution of the final product rather than in the concept itself. You're working with less here. As with cooking, as with painting, if you're going to go extremely minimalist, then everything you do must be superb, since you'll have less components to draw on to distract from any existing shortcomings. You're focusing on the life of one person, so that tale of personal struggle had better be really good. If it's not, then you will not succeed. For this reason, a lot of centralized stories topple over or feel sort of aimless, since there isn't enough context given to know why the story is being told in the first place. Games like this tend to lack a clearly defined focus, and I'm sorry to say that this holds true for Dragon Age 2 as well. Now when it comes to your companion characters, they themselves are either boring or forgettable. At no point did I feel as much connection to any of these characters as I did in the first game. There was just nobody interesting enough. Granted, there's some refreshing role reversals such as the Dwarven Archer, the combat-oriented female characters, and the Elven Warrior, but their personalities and backstories just don't meet the high standard most people expect from BioWare titles, and every single party member is stuck in one mode throughout the entirety of the game. This is probably the only BioWare title where I can say I felt nothing for any of the companion characters. Anders complains about the plight of mages constantly. Fenris the elf, and former slave, constantly has this edgy, moody demeanor.
Don't come running to me next time you pick up one of these diseases.
Isn't that the point of magic?
I don't want to know.
Isabella, the invariably flirtatious pirate wench who looks like a 14-year-old boy designed her a character model, is stranded in Kirkwall since she lost her ship. Aveline, the female warrior, could be a decent character but seems too focused on maintaining order and justice to feel realistic. And the list goes on. All the characters have their shortcomings, and most of them feel like they're pointless additions to your party, who either invite themselves along or stay with you for no clearly defined reason. I don't think the strongest character in Dragon Age 2 could hold a candle to the weakest character in Origins. Now, I realize I've been pretty tough on the game thus far, but at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say I hated the game, because I didn't. In terms of gameplay, Dragon Age 2 is incredible. You can once again choose from 3 distinct classes, being the Warrior, Rogue, and Mage classes. The Mage is by far the most relevant of the 3 classes since the story deals almost exclusively on this issue of Templars versus Mages. Playing as a Mage will make you feel as pivotal to the story as is possible, and I personally found it the most fun to play as well. A lot of people have complained about the changes to gameplay, but I didn't have a problem with it myself. Dragon Age 2 is a well-made game, and the changes to combat, the interface, as well as the graphics were all welcome in my opinion. Auto attack can be a bit dull, and it's nice to feel as though you're taking command of your character in battle, and truly, the system isn't all that different from the pause and play style. And especially if you're using a console, this version is much more engaging. You'll still be able to manage your character's tactics and choreograph their movements, which you'll need to do if you play above the easy difficulty mode. And the focus has been put on upgrading your party members' unique sets of armor, similar to as in Mass Effect, though you can still customize their accessories. Now graphically, the game is far superior to the first game. The textures are much improved, the lighting's better, the character models look smoother, and the environment looks much more polished than it did in the first game. It could be argued that the art style isn't as good since a lot of the faces of elves and dwarves in particular look almost exactly the same, with only a couple of tweaks here and there to provide the illusion of variation in their appearances, and a lot of the supposedly different locations you'll visit while exploring some of the outlying areas look almost identical to one another. And a lot more time could have been spent on making Kirkwall itself appear more visually interesting, especially since you'll rarely leave the city. The interface is much improved in this title and makes everything much more intuitive, and it functions a lot better than it did in the first game. As with the first game, the sound design is fantastic, the sound effects are spot on, and the voice acting, once again, is wonderful across the board. And once again, I must praise the excellent work from composer Inon Zur. Each location is accompanied by fitting music, though I appreciated the variation in tracks from the first game. Dragon Age 2's thematic, dark undertones are perfectly accented by the ominous and foreboding score. After 3 playthroughs, I can honestly say that while I wasn't initially excited about all the changes that have been made to the series, Dragon Age 2 is still a solidly crafted adventure, and from a mechanical standpoint, It is a very, very well made game. It's much different in structure from the first game, and since the first game is undoubtedly the superior in my mind, it's extremely hard to attempt to separate the two from one another. Does it provide as good an RPG experience as Origins? No, not remotely. But it's still a solid game, and with a good story to tell, and smooth gameplay. Once you look at what Dragon Age 2 did, and you stop trying to compare it to the original game, and you see its shortcomings for what they are, but also recognize what it did well, then you'll realize it's not the horrible game that a lot of players have labeled it. Dragon Age 2 had a lot to live up to, and I've said from the beginning to those who have asked me about it, that if this had been the first game in the series, its reception would have been much, much better. The reused location designs, the simplification of classic RPG elements, the new combat engine, these things may seem like an obvious attempt to cash in on another market of gamers who are perhaps less prone to RPGs, but at the same time, I genuinely feel as though Dragon Age 2 was an acceptable addition to the series. What it does well, it does extremely well, and what it does poorly merely leaves something to be desired and can be fixed with a longer development time and more focused writing. This is still BioWare we're talking about, and since the title took the path of the in-between sequel, we should be expecting a third entry. And I'm sure they'll be able to take their criticisms with Dragon Age 2 to heart and develop a much sharper product in the future. But for now, just know that Dragon Age 2 is still a good game. It's not at the same level of brilliance as the first game. Nope, it is not. But it is a good game in its own right, and it comes with a solid, though not exactly enthusiastic, recommendation from me. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.